The Wasp Factory. If Home Alone was written by Hannibal Lecter and set in a decaying Scottish marshland, you'd get The Wasp Factory. Frank Caldum isn't your average narrator. He's a teenager with a love for explosives, ritualistic animal slaughter, and casual child murder. His hobbies include setting traps for wasps in a homemade death contraption, lying to himself, and inventing entire religions to make sense of his increasingly twisted world. You know, normal coming-of-age stuff. His dad? A manipulative creep who gaslights Frank into oblivion. And when the ultimate family secret drops, that Frank isn't even a boy, biologically, you realize this story isn't just disturbing because of the gore. It's disturbing because of the psychological dissection, the mutilation of identity, the abandonment of any stable reality. It's gender trauma by way of gothic horror, wrapped in a layer of nihilism so thick, it might as well be cement. The writing? Cold, precise, detached, like a surgeon describing an autopsy. That's exactly the point. Banks isn't interested in morality tales. He's inviting you into a rotted psyche and daring you to find empathy where there should be revulsion. Spoiler, you probably will. Frank isn't a monster in the traditional sense. He's a product of secrecy, of shame, of a family that treats truth like a disease. The violence he inflicts feels methodical because it is. It's his only way of understanding a world that gave him nothing but silence and lies. This isn't a horror novel. It's a psychological collapse wearing a horror costume. No jump scares, no demons, just one teenager, one island, and a truth so ugly it makes you feel complicit just for reading. Welcome to the Wasp Factory. And if you think it's over the top, Frank would say you're just not taking it seriously enough. Haunted. If Saw, The Hunger Games, and a Reddit thread full of unhinged confessionals had a baby, it would be Haunted. This book is a collection of short stories framed around a twisted writer's retreat, where a group of aspiring authors isolate themselves in an abandoned theater to write the next great American novel. Except, instead of writing, they slowly descend into cannibalism, mutilation, and psychological warfare. Each person has a backstory, and each backstory is more disgusting than the last. There's self-castration, sexual self-destruction, death by hot tub, and that's just chapter 1. The most infamous story, Guts, is so revolting it made people pass out at public readings. It involves a pool, a vacuum, and parts of the human anatomy that were never meant to be in the same sentence as accidentally ingested. The real horror? These people could be real. The influencer who films their breakdown. The true crime podcaster who dreams of being the next victim. The blogger who writes essays about their trauma, not to process it, but to trend. But Haunted isn't just gore for the sake of it. It's a satirical throat punch to every fame-hungry narcissist who thinks trauma equals talent. These characters don't just suffer. They choose to suffer, escalating their own misery to gain sympathy, attention, and ultimately a book deal. It's a grotesque parody of how we monetize pain, how tragedy becomes currency, and how low people will go for 15 minutes of infamy. Chuck Palahniuk doesn't care about your comfort. He wants to punch you in the face with your own reflection. Haunted isn't a book. It's a trap, a scream disguised as satire. And if you finish it, you should probably ask yourself why, because some stories aren't meant to be told. We need to talk about Kevin. Let's get one thing straight. This isn't a book about a bad kid. It's about a sociopathic spawn of Satan dressed in khakis and a mother wondering if the demon in her guest room is her fault, or just the universe's sick joke. Eva never wanted a kid, but biology won. So out comes Kevin, born glaring, practically sneering. As a toddler, he rejects touch. As a child, he terrorizes. As a teen, he commits a school massacre, casual, calculated. The book's told through Eva's letters to her estranged husband, who, spoiler alert, spent most of Kevin's life wearing parental blinders so thick they might as well have been VR goggles set to "everything's fine." But everything's not fine. Kevin's not fine. He's ice-cold manipulation wrapped in human skin. And he's not doing it for attention. He's doing it because he likes watching people squirm. The horror here isn't jump scares or gore. It's the slow, suffocating drip of maternal guilt. Eva sees it all. His dead-eyed stares, his cruelty, his games, and everyone tells her she's overreacting, overthinking, maybe even projecting. Because heaven forbid a mother not instantly love her child. But Kevin doesn't need love. He needs a muzzle and a padded cell. And yet, Eva keeps trying and failing and trying again until Kevin gives her the ultimate "I told you so." The mass murder of classmates, teachers, and yes, even his own family. And what's left? A mother in a jail of her own mind, writing letters to a ghost, asking a question that has no answer. It's a horror story about motherhood, denial, and the bleak possibility that some people are just born broken, and they'll take everything with them on the way down. Animal Farm. Imagine Shrek, but instead of fairy tale redemption, the animals form a union, overthrow the humans, and then build their own dictatorship with extra steps. That's Animal Farm, a brutal allegory of revolution gone rancid, where the pigs start with idealism and end with state-approved genocide. It begins simple. Old Major, basically Karl Marx in a pig suit, dies after giving a fiery TED Talk about animal oppression. The animals rise up, oust Mr. Jones, and rename the farm Animal Farm, because branding matters when launching a regime. At first, things look utopian. Shared labor, equality, community. But then comes Napoleon, a literal pig with Stalin's personality and the ambition of a Bond villain. He ousts his rival, Snowball, with the help of his personal secret police, killer dogs, rewrites history, and slowly consolidates power. Laws change. History changes. Reality changes. All animals are equal becomes all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And if that sounds familiar, congrats. You've lived through high school. What's so disturbing isn't just the corruption, it's how fast everyone forgets. The sheep chant slogans. The horses work themselves to death. The chickens are executed for asking questions. The truth doesn't matter. Only loyalty does. And by the end, the pigs are walking on two legs, drinking whiskey, and cutting deals with humans. No one can tell the difference anymore. Not between pig and man. Not between liberator and tyrant. Animal Farm is a horror story about power, how it mutates, metastasizes, and consumes, how revolutions are born in hope and die in betrayal, and how language, weaponized and twisted, can turn freedom into a fable. It's not just Orwell being edgy, it's a warning that the next time someone promises equality for all, you'd better check if they're standing on two legs or four. Blindness. 1 minute you're driving, the next, white. Not black, not darkness, white. As if the world just exploded into a blank page and took your eyeballs with it. That's how blindness starts. A sudden, unexplained epidemic of mass blindness. No time for explanations, no warning. Just people going blind like it's the latest TikTok trend. The government naturally reacts with compassion and efficiency. Just kidding. They lock everyone in an abandoned asylum and say, figure it out. Inside, chaos. Outside, denial. It's society stripped to the bone and then beaten with it. There's no electricity, no food, no order. Just a bunch of blind strangers bumping into walls and devolving into Lord of the Flies with adult diapers. One woman can still see, mysteriously immune. But she hides it because hope is dangerous here. She watches the world unravel, watches people fight over stale bread, watches women sold for toilet paper, watches her husband fall apart in real time. This isn't about going blind, it's about what blindness reveals. Take away sight, and suddenly we see what humans really are. Panicked, selfish, violent. The only law that matters? Survival. And even that's optional. The most chilling part isn't the cruelty. It's how normal it feels. How fast we drop the charade. One group of men literally stockpile food and demand sex in exchange. The state sends in soldiers who shoot anyone who comes too close. And when the building burns down, No one's surprised, not even sad. By the time the story spills back into the outside world, the city is unrecognizable, a wasteland of filth, fear, and silence. But maybe, that's what it took to start over. Blindness isn't dystopian, it's a stress test, one that humanity fails, gloriously. And the scariest question it leaves you with? What would you do in the dark? House of Leaves? This isn't a book, it's a trap, a cursed object disguised as literature. The moment you open House of Leaves, you're not reading anymore. You're descending into a hallway that wasn't there yesterday, into footnotes that spiral like sinkholes, into madness. Your own or someone else's? Hard to tell. It all starts with a documentary, but not a real one. A fictional one described by a blind man in a manuscript found by a tattoo artist named Johnny Truant. Already confused? Good. That's intentional. The documentary follows a house owned by a photographer, Will Navidson, and his family. One day, he discovers something impossible, a hallway in their home that shouldn't exist. It leads nowhere, then everywhere. It expands, contracts, shifts, murmurs. People go in. Some don't come back. Others come back. Changed. But that's just one layer. The deeper horror is watching how everyone, Johnny, Navidson, readers like you, becomes obsessed, consumed. You're not reading the book. The book is reading you. And Johnny, our editor, our guide, he's no hero, just another casualty. He's writing from motel rooms, doped out of his mind, haunted by a manuscript he can't finish, and a life that's already over. The troop, Boy Scouts, badges, campfires, worms that eat you alive from the inside out. Welcome to the troop, where camp horror means more than ghost stories and soggy marshmallows. A group of teenage boys head to a remote island with their scoutmaster for a wholesome weekend of bonding, mosquito bites, and definitely not traumatizing life lessons. Instead, they get Patient Zero, an emaciated, dying man who stumbles out of the woods like a junky nightmare and brings with him a hunger that eats through the story, literally. What's inside him? A parasite. A genetically engineered tapeworm designed to create perfect weight loss. Because yes, in this universe, science decided the real enemy was carbs. The result? An infection that multiplies so fast it turns human hosts into monsters. Sweating, starving, twitching wrecks. One boy gets it, then another. And suddenly, this Boy Scout trip turns into Lord of the Flies, meets Alien, meets a biology teacher's worst acid trip. One boy becomes a tyrant, another snaps into full psychopathy. The rest just try to survive, barely. And the Scoutmaster? Useless. Paralyzed by denial, he watches as leadership slips away. What's left is chaos, savagery, and a growing pile of corpses. The military watches from a distance, because of course this was all part of a secret experiment. Let the boys die, study the results, see what happens when you add biological horror to puberty. The troop doesn't ask, what if monsters attack kids? It asks, what if the kids are the monsters? And the answer is horrifying. Naked lunch. If Kafka, Hunter S. Thompson, and a heroin needle had a baby, it'd be Naked Lunch. A book so chaotic, it doesn't even bother with a plot. This is less of a story and more of a psychotic break printed in Helvetica. A literary chemical burn. Our non-hero is William Lee, a junky government agent who drifts through surreal dystopias like Inner Zone, a city that feels like Tijuana got possessed by a Lovecraftian tapeworm. There are shape-shifting drug dealers, talking assholes, literally not metaphorically, and orgies that make Dante's Inferno read like Reader's Digest. And you don't follow a narrative. You stumble through fragments, each chapter like a blackout you don't remember agreeing to. There's no beginning, middle, and end. There's only disintegration. Psychological, physical, grammatical. Syntax dies here. So does your sense of stability. The book was so obscene for its time that it got banned, then defended by people who said, no, it's a metaphor, but even the metaphors are high. Addiction, control, paranoia, sexual repression, government surveillance. It's all packed into a kaleidoscope of filth that refuses to make sense unless you're on the same drugs Burroughs was. It's grotesque, it's absurd, and yet it's genius. Because buried beneath the sewage and cockroach gods is a raw howl of rebellion. Against censorship, against conformity, against the sanitized version of America that pretends monsters only exist in horror movies. In Naked Lunch, the monsters are real. They wear lab coats. They write policy. They experiment on junkies like they're broken dolls. And every page screams, "This is your brain. This is your brain on language. Any questions?" This book isn't just read, it's survived. And by the time you finish, you won't be sure if you're enlightened or just infected.